Aloha, Kako, and welcome to the 1 p.m. February 17th, 2021 hearing of AEN. I am Mike Gabbard, the chair of the committee. And let's see, a few housekeeping announcements. Today's AEN committee hearing, including the audio and video of remote participants, is being streamed live on YouTube. We also have a 1:45 p.m. agenda right after this 1 o'clock. You'll find the links to viewing options for all Senate meetings on the live and on-demand video page of the legislature's website at capitol.hawaii.gov. And in the unlikely event that we have to abruptly end this hearing due to major technical difficulties, the committee will reconvene to discuss any outstanding business at 1 p.m. on February 19th during our AEN via video conference time slot. And a public notice will be posted on the legislature's website. Also, please be aware that February 19th is after the February 18th first lateral filing deadline, but the clerk's office asked that we still include a roll date in case something happens. For testifiers, all testifier audio will be muted and video disabled until shortly before it's your turn to testify. And because of our 90-minute time limit for each of the AEN hearings, there will be a 2-minute time limit for all testifiers. And we'll have a virtual countdown timer on the Zoom screen, so please be aware of the timer. I'll be announcing only the testifiers who will be providing testimony via Zoom. And for the complete list of testifiers, along with all of the written testimony, please go to the legislature's website, and you'll find the link on the status page for the measure. And we apologize if the closed captioning does not accurately transcribe the names. So first up, the first measure is SB 350. Relating to the environment. It requires the Department of Health to fill the vacant division chief staff position within the Environmental Management Division by October 1st, 2021, and consider environmental justice issues when making certain assessments and determinations. It also requires the Clean Water Branch to perform water quality testing during brown water advisories, inform the public of health risks associated with water runoff during brown water advisories, and establish an Environmental Management Division Oversight Advisory Board. Also requires the Legislative Reference Bureau to conduct a comprehensive review of the Environmental Management Division. So first up for testifiers, we have Mike Moran from the Kihei Community Association.
Hi,
Mike,
Senator, they're not present.
Not present, okay. Lauren Blickley with Surfrider Foundation.
Aloha. I wanted to start off, thank you, Senator Gabbard, for introducing this measure. My name is Lauren Blickley, and I'm the Hawai'i Regional Manager with the Surfrider Foundation. I want to begin my testimony just by acknowledging the complexities of maintaining a statewide water quality monitoring program, and also acknowledging the limitations and the constraints associated with programs such as this. And in that acknowledgement, just note that this is a really important bill, that we're not asking the Department of Health to do anything more or extra, rather continue and requiring the monitoring that they're already doing. And when you start really taking a look at some of the water quality monitoring to ensure that it is equitable across our communities, that our monitoring isn't just focused on our tourist beaches, we at Surfrider support a citizen science water quality monitoring that helps, a program that helps fill in some of these gaps. And we try to test mainly in community areas and local surf spots that are not regularly tested, and also really to ensure that the Department of Health continues to monitor during brown water advisories and to suspend their practice of not sampling when a brown water advisory occurs, which is what is currently happening. So I think that this bill is a really important step forward. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to ensure that it strengthens the water quality monitoring, and ultimately our goal is to improve public health. We're a community that is surrounded by water and depends on healthy ocean ecosystems, and this bill takes us a step further. So thank you.
Lauren, can you stick around for questions if there are any questions?
Yes, I'll be here.
We'll go through all the testifiers and then we'll see if there are any questions. Next is Christina Comfort with Surfrider Foundation Oahu chapter. Christina?
Aloha, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today. I am here on behalf of the Surfrider Foundation Oahu chapter as the previous co-chair of the Blue Water Task Force program, which is the citizen science program that Lauren just referenced that does water quality testing throughout Oahu. And there's also Blue Water Task Force groups on the other islands as well. And I want to echo everything that Lauren said, and additionally talk a little bit about the need for monitoring during brownwater events in particular. With the Blue Water Task Force, we do consistent monitoring even when there's brownwater events and heavy rain events. And through this monitoring, we have found that we do get higher enterococcus or fecal indicator bacteria readings during brownwater events and during rain events. So I've included some data about this and some plots in my written testimony, and you can see that there are high increases in fecal indicator bacteria during those times. So therefore, from a scientific perspective, I think it's really important to continue testing during those times, because if you avoid testing when it's brown, you'll end up biasing the data towards dry weather conditions. And for a lot of beaches and locations, this can be, really different measurements at different times. I also think the component about environmental justice is really important. As Lauren mentioned, it's important to make sure that we're not just prioritizing tourist beaches, but also areas where communities use the water and fish and gather food. So I think that a review of how those beaches are prioritized would be really helpful for the community as a whole. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Next is Eileen Nani with us.
Hi, Senator. They're not present.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions? I have a question for Lauren. Lauren, you saw the Department of Health is opposing this bill, and they don't think it's necessary. Why does Surfrider feel so strongly that we need to move forward on these changes?
Great question, Senator Gabbard, and thank you for asking this. And I should acknowledge that, it's not just Surfrider Foundation. We also submitted, part of our testimony has an additional 21 community-based organizations, including canoe clubs, including other water quality groups, and Kihei Community Association, or community associations as well. So I do just want to acknowledge that piece. I want to tag off of what Christina was saying and appreciate her being on here as well, because one of the big things right now, as she mentioned, is by not testing during brownwater advisories, we are essentially skewing our data. And so it looks like our data here in Hawaii is really clean. We've got this great clean water, right? Well, that's because we're not collecting data during days like today on Maui where it's raining. So we're essentially skewing our data to dry conditions to really have a robust data set and understand what's happening in our waters and the possible threat to our public health. We need to ensure that we have a robust data set that covers our wet conditions as well, which is when our runoff events happen. We also know that by not monitoring during these groundwater advisories, that we're potentially missing, again, that public health aspect. And that if we're then issuing warnings, or therefore not issuing warnings when we do, the public may not be listening, right? They may not be aware, they may not be focused on that because they don't trust the data that is being collected. Another issue, as Christina brought up, is looking at, we understand that there's limited resources, right? And it's easy for us to come in and say, we need to do this and that, right? We're not in it every single day, but understanding there's limited resources in shifting our priorities. So not adding more beaches, but shifting priorities. So for example, here on Maui, you can look at Ka'anapali. Ka'anapali was tested 30 times in 2020, and none of those 30 tests were high for fecal indicator bacteria. On the opposite side of the island, like near Wai'ehu, Waihe'e, those couple of beaches were tested twice in 2020, 2 times. And these are community-based beaches. These are beaches that have important surf spots. like Christine was saying, gathering areas, swimming areas, like these are places where our community is utilizing. And by not testing these areas, even though our citizen science has gone out to Wai'ehu and Waihe'e, and in the areas that we're able to test, consistently showing that, you know, over half of our samples are high for fecal indicator bacteria. So because of that, we're saying, well, if we've got data from these areas for a long time that we know are consistently meeting water quality standards, can we shift these areas and prioritize other community-based areas that maybe don't have data, and that we can really take a hard look and ensure that we're protecting our public safety? I think that there's a lot of examples of really good water quality monitoring areas in other states. And I wish that we could, as Hawaii, because we are so tied to the ocean year round, we should have one of the best water quality programs and monitoring of the, you know, continental United States and of the states. We should be leading that. And right now we're really lagging that. And I think
I have to cut you off, Lauren.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've got a huge agenda today, but thank you very much for that. Okay, members, we'll move on to the next bill, SB 369, relating to wastewater systems. This establishes the time of transfer wastewater system inspection program in the Department of Health to oversee the inspection and repair of any individual wastewater system at the time of sale or transfer of residential real property attached to the wastewater system, and it excludes certain sales or transfers. First up is the Department of Health, Environmental Health Administration. Not here. They weren't here for the last one either. What's going on? Next is Hawaii Reef and Ocean Coalition.
Hey, Senator, they're not present.
Neither one of them, huh? Okay. All right, neither present. So, okay, members, nobody asked questions, so we'll go on to the next measure. 486, SB 486, relating to composting, exempts artisan scale composting operations from Department of Health regulations to divert organic materials from Hawaii's landfills. And first up is Department of Health, Environmental Health Administration.
Good afternoon, Chair. Lene Ichinotsubo with the Department of Health Solid and Hazardous Waste Branch. We stand on our written testimony providing comments.
Thank you very much. Phyllis Shimabukuro Geyser from Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. The department stands on its written testimony with concerns and offers comments and a clarifying amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. Next is Brian Miyamoto from the Hawaii Farm Bureau.
Good afternoon, Chair Gabbard, Vice Chair
Hello,
Nishima,
Brian.
members of the committee. Brian Miyamoto here on behalf of the Hawaii Farm Bureau. Our testimony, we offer comments and concerns. As written, we do oppose this measure respectfully. We do support composting, but we believe that no commercial composting facility or operation should be exempt from Department of Health regulatory oversight. It is our understanding, Chair, that exemptions and discretionary processes already exist within Department of Health administrative rules, and that they could offer less of a regulatory burden on small-scale composting operations. These rules should be reviewed and amended if necessary to provide relief from overly burdensome and unreasonable restrictions on certain small source limited composting facilities. Again, we do support composting, and we defer to the expertise of the Department of Health and Department of Agriculture regarding the appropriate level of oversight necessary to operate a composting facility while also protecting our farmers and the general community from potential fire, spread of pathogens, and devastating invasive species and environmental contamination. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Mahalo, Brian. Next is Jennifer Milholland.
Hello, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I testified in support with my written testimony, but we'll just use this time to point out some suggested amendments. I think it is fair to point out that across the entire country, most of the regulations for composting, there is an exemption threshold, that there is an acknowledgement that a minor amounts of certain types of organic materials, not all, not like biosolids and carcasses and things like that, but certain materials under certain volumes and certain throughputs are allowed to operate without permitting, without registration or reporting. So for my written testimony, I highlighted some suggested amendments that would both increase the volume from 1 cubic yard per month to 12 to take into consideration the different stakeholders we would like to benefit, as well as more clearly defining the types of materials limited to green waste, agricultural trimmings, vegetative food scraps, things that are very typically not pathogenic or harmful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's the last testifier on 486. Members, are there any questions for the testifiers? Seeing none, we'll move on to SB 587 relating to statewide composting. Requires the Department of Health to periodically update its co-composting rules, requires Department of Health to establish a multi-tiered registration and permitting system for composting facilities, allows composting and co-composting in agricultural districts. Department of Health, Environmental Health Administration.
Good afternoon, Chair. Lene Ichinotsubo with the Department of Health, Solid and Hazardous Waste Branch. We oppose this bill for two primary reasons. One, we disagree with the exemptions of class 3 and 4, which appears to cover majority of our composters under our current regulatory oversight. The second issue is, while we would like to update our composting rules, as well as our remaining solid waste regulations on a regular basis, we will require resources to do so. However, given the fact that we've already lost 1 solid waste inspector positions and funding for other positions this fiscal year, and anticipate losing another solid waste position this upcoming biennium budget, resulting in a loss of about 25% of our existing solid waste positions, we feel that it is very unlikely to receive additional resources at this time, given the strength of our economic situation, and thus stressing our existing resources. So we do have concerns with regards to that, and therefore we are opposing at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next is Brian Miyamoto from Hawai'i Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Chair. The Hawaii Farm Bill will stand on its written testimony offering comments similar to the previous measure. Thank you for this opportunity to submit testimony.
Thank you, Brian. Next is Jennifer Milholland.
Aloha again, Senators. I have submitted testimony in support of this measure with very specific amendments, suggested amendments for the language. I stand on the testimony specifically elaborating the numerous environmental and fiscal justifications for revising and lowering the regulatory burdens on specific forms of composting and co-composting in particular. But if I can take a moment just to highlight the suggested language amendments in summary, we have recommended that the date for implementation would be 2023 instead of 2022. Instead of every 5 years, we're recommending every 10 years for required updates. And more specifically, we're recommending that all of Section 3 be struck and replaced with provisions that allow for a much broader approach to these tiers and classes. So not moving away from prescriptive tiers and more focused on specific models that, like I mentioned earlier, already exist in the country, already exist in templates that speak to exclusion tiers, that speak to registration and reporting tiers, and then after that, full permitting that already exists within the Department of Health. So our hope here is that that language that already exists, both in other states, language, as well as existing templates from the U.S. Composting Council, could be utilized. And I'm available for questions if you have them.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, members, any questions for our testifiers? Okay, seeing none, moving on to SB 132 relating to water pollution. Adds the chemicals homosalate and octocrylene and octisalate to the sale and distribution of sunscreen ban beginning on January 1st, 2023. First up is Environmental Health, DOH.
Good Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Diana Felton, toxicologist with the Department of Health. We stand on our written testimony with comments and are available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Next is Brian Nielsen from DLNR.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. David Sakota on behalf of Brian and DLNR. We submitted written testimony in support and will stand on that testimony.
Thank you. Lauren Zerbel from the Hawaii Food Industry Association.
Thank you, Chair. We'll stand on our written testimony in opposition.
Thank you, Lauren. Ian Davies from.
Good afternoon, Chairs Gabbard and Nishihara, members of the committee. My name's Ian Davies, and I'm Director of Environmental Science Programs for PCPC. We're concerned that coral reef decline in Hawaii is being unfairly attributed to the use of ultraviolet or UV filters. For example, a 2019 PCPC-funded monitoring study detected extremely low UV filter levels in Hawaiian coastal waters. And for context, this amounted to the equivalent of adding a few drops of sunscreen into a large sports stadium filled with water. Now, importantly, octocrylene levels in Hawaiian waters were orders of magnitude lower than levels that may be toxic to coral. Meanwhile, there are no published studies showing octosalate or homosalate are toxic for coral. Above all, PCPC is concerned that banning sunscreen active ingredients will have a detrimental impact on public health, especially given the limited number of approved UV filters in the US. Thank you for the opportunity to voice PCPC's opposition to HB 132. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Next is Lisa Bishop from Friends of Hanauma Bay and 44 others.
Chair Nishihara and committee members. I'm Lisa Bishop, representing Friends of Hanauma Bay, 33 other Hawaii coral reef stakeholder organizations and businesses, and eminent scientists from around the world, including the Sorbonne, Shandong University in China, Ben Gurion and Tel Aviv universities in Israel, the University of Tehran, Chemists Without Borders, Canadian, US, and UK board certified doctors, the College of Charleston, South Carolina, and the Hereticus Environmental Laboratory in Virginia. We support Senate Bill 132, but urge you to amend the language to that found in House Bill 102 that recommends adding the two petrochemicals octocrylene and avobenzone found in sunscreens to Hawaii Session Laws 2018, Act 104. We also support retaining the January 2023 effective date. Mahalo for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 132 with amendments.
Mahalo, Lisa. Next is Len Miyahira from the Public Access to Sunscreens Coalition.
Thank you, Chair Gabbard. Hello?
Hello.
Hi. Thank you, Chair Gabbard. My name is Lynn Miyahira, and I'm representing the Public Access to Sunscreen Coalition. We oppose SB 132 because it creates additional barriers for people to access safe, effective, and FDA-approved sunscreens. We know that sunscreens are an important tool for skin cancer prevention. However, the science behind the purported link between sunscreen and coral reef damage has been called into question, and earlier studies did not consider the full complexity of a coral reef system and are based on limited laboratory testing that led policymakers to believe that banning sunscreen would improve coral health. Please note, and this is very important, that there are now studies that contradict earlier research that have been widely used to promote sunscreen bans. For example, a 2019 study by Dr. Karis Michlamore of the University of Maryland contradicts earlier studies that show actual levels of oxybenzone sampled in seawater in Hawaii to be 141 times lower than previously stated and about 1,000 times lower than levels considered toxic to corals. And subsequent follow-ups have not been able to replicate the work and are showing that there's a lot of conflicting information. So therefore, Congress has asked the National Academy of Sciences, our preeminent scientific body here in the US to review all the data, evaluate the scientific merit of all the current science available. So we're asking that the legislature wait until this study is completed, which is about 2022 to be expected to be completed. And this study should inform all decision makers about legislation regarding sunscreen ingredients. And we should wait until there's current sufficient data to make a risk-benefit analysis. I also want to note that the FDA has made it really abundantly clear that it still strongly advises the continued use of sunscreen. And to say that the FDA only approves zinc oxide and titanium dioxide as safe for humans to use is simply not true. So again, we just want to ask the legislature hold on passing HB 102 until we have more data. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Mahalo. Next is the Hawaii Reef and Ocean Coalition.
Hi, Senator. They're not present.
Present.
Is Ted here?
I am.
Okay, Ted, are you representing High Rock?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I would disagree that the FDA has not said that anything except zinc oxide and titanium dioxide is generally accepted as safe and effective. I would also point to my testimony for High Rock's testimony, indicating that the use of sunscreens as actually done in chemicals often washes out and is not frequently applied. It's something that the World Health Organization has described as sunscreen abuse. Mineral sunscreens stay on much better and don't kill reefs. And I would urge the committee to adopt this now. Under the precautionary principle, we need to protect the reefs. In addition, I would ask the chair to make the amendments that Lisa Bishop mentioned with regard to Senate Bill 368. And I'm available for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. That's all the testifiers, members. Are there any questions? Okay, I have a question for Ted for High Rock.
Yes.
Ted, can you clarify from your testimony about the preferred chemicals that High Rock recommends that we address in this legislation and why?
Yes, the bill as written now indicates that there should be a ban on octocrylene, homosalate, and octisalate. In reviewing the data, scientists have indicated to me that the strongest case for harm to the reefs and to human health is actually octocrylene and avobenzone. That is not to say that octisalate and homosalate are safe. It is to say that the data at this point are stronger with regard to avobenzone, and therefore we suggest that you adopt those and amend the bill accordingly as indicated in my testimony. That would make it consistent, by the way, with House Bill 102. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. All right, members, moving on to SB 1026 relating to the Animal Industry Special Fund, adding new sources of revenue generated by the State Veterinary Laboratory and Animal Disease Control Branch that can be deposited into the Animal Industry Special Fund. First up is Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geyser from Department of Ag. Phyllis?
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. The department stands on its written testimony in strong support of this measure.
Thank you, Phyllis. That's the only testifier. Members, any questions? Moving on, SB 1027 relating to hemp. Hemp hooray. Amends section 141-14 to allow the Industrial Hemp Special Fund to be utilized for the Department of Agriculture's responsibilities regarding hemp. And first up is Shelley Choi, testifying for the Department of Agriculture. Shelley here.
Senator, they're not present.
Next is Phyllis Geyser from Department of Ag.
Aloha, Chair. Thank you very much. I think Shelley was here to support the department if there are any questions. We stand in strong support as stated in our written testimony.
Okay. All right. Let's see, 27. Any questions, members? Yeah, Phyllis, I had a question. Maybe you can, I know Shelley is the resident expert on hemp, but In her testimony, she mentioned that there's 55 current licensed hemp growers in the state at this point. So can you just give us a summary of how you think the USDA program is going now that you've transferred over to getting licenses directly from USDA? How's that going?
Well, I would have to defer to Shelley on that. Could you allow her to speak?
Sure.
Hi. So as far as we know, it's going the transition has gone smoothly. Getting licenses for the most part has been fairly simple. It's a lot easier and more straightforward of a process than the pilot program due to the nature of the fact that it's just a commercial license, not a specific research program. The planting season is now, so we haven't really seen, how many people and how much acreage and what kind of harvests. We won't see that till later in the year. But for the most part, it seems to be going really smoothly and it's free. So that really helps out.
Okay. That's a nice field of hemp that you're in right now. So, okay, we'll move on to SB 1297, relating to the issuance of special purpose revenue bonds to assist Maui Grown Coffee, Inc. This extends the authorization to issue SPURBs to assist Maui Grown Coffee, Inc. with the operation and expansion of its farm and mill. First up is James Kimo Falconer.
Good afternoon, Chair Gabbard, Vice Chair Nishihara, members of the Senate and the AEN Committee. My name is Kimo Falconer, and I stand on my written testimony in support of this bill to extend Act 116, the SPURB for Maui Grown Coffee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Mahalo, Kimo. Members, any questions? Kimo, I have a question. In 2017, your SPURB through Act 116 was for $13 million. Have your plans changed at all since 2017?
Well, yeah. So in 2017, our plan was to expand on the land that was purchased by Mahi Pono, HCNS in Maui. It was purchased, and I became a partner / consultant with them. And we are expanding coffee over there, but we are also looking at possibly doing, well, we are looking at now is actually constructing a new milling site that'll purpose coffee milling for all the coffee growers on Maui. And so that's about the only thing that's really changed. And then the other thing would be if I might have issues with my water situation on West Maui if we do lose our water in the stream, so due to the seaworm issues. So we might have to be looking at maybe doing some well or groundwater if that happens. So other than that, those are the only two opportunities that we have right now. Yeah, the COVID thing kind of threw us in a wrench here. It's like we were almost right there, but then this whole thing stopped us. So we need to extend it if we can.
All right. Thanks, Kimo. Next, members, we're moving on to SB 1344, relating to food sustainability, requires the Department of Ag in coordination with the appropriate departmental agency to prepare and periodically update a functional plan for seafood sustainability that expands the state's priority on food by including wild seafood as a viable food source. Phyllis Geiser, Department of Ag, is up first.
Mahalo, Chair. The department stands on its written testimony offering comments on this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Danielle Bass from Office of Planning.
Aloha, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Danielle Bass, State Sustainability Coordinator of the Office of Planning. We support the intent of this measure and offer comments and amendments. Specifically, we recommend that the most appropriate functional plan to integrate wild seafood sustainability would be the State Agricultural Functional Plan. That functional plan was last updated in 1991, and there's been significant agricultural economic benefits since that time frame. So we think that such an update would be beneficial sought by this legislation. We also recommend a bit of a delay in the by extending the submission of this plan by 1 year, seeing that it'll likely take more than 6 months to update the agricultural functional plan. So those are the comments and amendments we offered to the committee, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Mahalo, Danielle. Next is Stephanie Sakamoto from Fishing Tales with Mike Sakamoto.
Aloha, Chair and members. Stephanie Sakamoto on behalf of Fishing Tales with Mike Sakamoto will stand in our written testimony in strong support. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Members, any questions? Senator Rhodes.
Thanks. For Department of Agriculture, the history of humans and overfishing is not a particularly good one. Do we have it in our capability to do something like this without falling into the usual trap of overfishing?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. As we stated in our testimony, we have no role in regulating pelagic fisheries and no authority to set policies. So, and enforcement actions. We deal with aquaculture, which is not, involved in deep ocean fishing or, it's more like attached to the shore or on ground fish and seafood cultivation. So, we would defer to, NOAA, NOAA fisheries for that.
So
but we understand your concern about the overfishing aspect of it. But our jurisdiction has been with what is commonly referred to as fish farming, which is on ground.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Also, I have a question, Phyllis, Department of Ag. Did you get a chance to take a look at the Office of Planning's suggested amendments for the bill?
No, I have not seen it, but I hear what Office of Planning is suggesting, and we would appreciate the delay of 1 year. I don't think that we could accomplish it in 6 months.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. All right, members, no further questions. We'll move on to the last measure on today's 1 o'clock agenda, SB 1405. Relating to the plant quarantine branch, appropriates general revenues to expand state-run quarantine facilities under the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture's plant quarantine branch. And Chris Manfredi from the Hawai'i Coffee Association.
Aloha, Chair Gabbard, members of the committee. Chris Manfredi testifying on behalf of the Hawai'i Coffee Association. We stand in our written testimony in strong support of this measure. Coffee leaf rust has recently been introduced to Hawaii. One of our long-term and most important strategies is to transition Hawaii's coffee farms to rust-resistant varieties, as has happened all over the coffee growing world. In order to be able to do that, we need partnership with the state and USDA APHIS to be able to quarantine these plants when they're brought in is an important measure in biosecurity. The state's facilities are outdated. They don't have the capacity that we need to be able to safely import these plant materials so that Hawaii's coffee industry can become more resilient as we fight this devastating disease. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm available for any questions.
Mahalo, Chris. Next is Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geyser from Department of Ag.
Aloha, Chair and members of the committee. The department appreciates the intent of the measure, provided it doesn't affect adversely the administration's priorities in the executive budget. We believe that the effort, in this measure would unfortunately not be the most timely approach to adequately address the immediate threat to the industry. As many are aware, it takes time for the department to implement CIP appropriations or any kind of capital improvement projects. And we believe that, it might take us 2 to 3 years to implement. So we believe that the HAR 4-70-6 allows the Board of Agriculture to shorten or exempt existing quarantines of restricted plants, provided that the plants can be propagated and imported under procedures that might mitigate the risks of pest introductions with the associated materials. So the department believes that the board's ability to shorten or exempt quarantine would be the most immediate and appropriate solution for importing clean stock. And we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Phyllis. Members, any questions? I've got a question for Chris. Chris, I've just been curious about this. I haven't been able to find out any answers. How did coffee leaf rust get here? Have we been able to pinpoint, the potential of harm that it's going to do to one of our biggest industries in ag? How did it get here? Have you been able to trace it down?
We don't know yet. We're still waiting for identification of the race of rust, which give us a clue of where it's from. Right now, it's pointing to Central America, possibly Mexico. But, one of the biosecurity measures that we have for imported coffee is to fumigate raw coffee on the mainland with methyl bromide. And there's been some debate as to whether or not that's an effective treatment for rust or not. I will say that importing raw coffee from South and Central America into coffee growing regions is a potential vector for that disease and for CBB or coffee berry borer as well. I don't know that we'll ever know precisely where it came from. There may be some clues, but right now our house is on fire and we're doing everything can to put that fire out.
I hear you, Chris. Okay, mahalo.
Thank you.
First, that's all of the testimony and the measures. We'll go into decision-making in the breakout room. See you in a minute. Reconvening the 1 o'clock AEN hearing on some various measures. We'll start off, I've conferred with my committee members, and we'll start off with Senate Bill 350 relating to the environment. On this measure here, the chair's recommendation, I acknowledge the concerns that are raised by Department of Health. I think they need to do a better job of making sure the public is informed about water quality issues in our nearshore waters. They did not offer any amendments to the bill, but this chair is open to suggestions from them as this bill continues to move forward. So the chair's recommendation will be to pass SB 3560 with tech amendments. Hang on here. Any, there it is. Any comments? I'll go ahead and take the vote. Chair votes aye. Vice Chair Nishihara?
Aye.
Senator Ocasio?
Aye.
Senator Rhodes?
Aye.
Senator Favela?
Aye.
Thank you, members. The measure passes. Moving on to SB 369, relating to wastewater systems. Excuse me. Members, this bill is about taking steps to reduce the problem we face with close to 90,000 cesspools contaminating our land and our groundwater. So the chair's recommendation will be to pass SB 369 with amendments. From Department of Health, we'll make 3 amendments included in their testimony. In section 2B on page 2, line 7, we'll revise the phrase, quote, "This section shall not apply to," unquote. It shall now read, quote, "This section and any rules promulgated to implement this section shall not apply to," unquote. And the reason for the change is because subsection E of the proposed new section mandates that rules be adopted to implement the section. And the additional language to make it clear that administrative rules would also not apply. And then in section 2B3 on page 2, line 13, we'll revise the phrase, quote, "incidental to the decrees," unquote, to read, "incidental to such decrees," unquote. And the reason for the change is because the phrase, "the decree," quote unquote, does not clearly identify what decree it relates to. And then in section 2D on page lines 16 through 20, we'll amend the wording to read, quote, "If an individual wastewater system fails inspection, the system shall be repaired or replaced within 1 year by the current property owner or by the prospective property owner with a written agreement to meet the design and construction requirements adopted by the department," unquote. And additionally, we'll include the contents of a related bill, Senate Bill 368, which would change the cesspool upgrade law to expand the ways that you can upgrade from a cesspool for the January 1st, 2050 conversion deadline from a septic system or aerobic treatment unit system to a department-approved wastewater system. And that way we'll have all the cesspool issues rolled into one bill. And then if there are any necessary tech amendments. Any discussion? Chair votes aye. Of the members present, are there any no votes or reservations? Hearing none, the measure passes. Thank you, members. And then moving on to, what's next? 486, relating to composting. Members, you'll recall on February 8th, we passed Senate Bill 964, a bill introduced by Senator Ocasio that also includes the artisan composting provisions. Therefore, we'll be deferring SB 486 indefinitely and using SB 964 as the vehicle. Okay, and then moving on to SB 587 relating to statewide composting. Members, the purpose of SB 587 is to improve our composting regulations and to divert more of our organics from the waste stream. So the chair's recommendation would be to pass SB 587 with amendments from language suggested by the Kokua Hawai'i Foundation. We'll amend the regulation reform deadlines from January 1st, 2022, January 1st, 2023, and the references to quote unquote updated every 5 years to quote unquote updated every 10 years. And this will allow Department of Health more time to realistically prepare the rules and regulation updates. And then we'll also strike the language in section 3 and insert language that outlines a broad set of tiers modeled on California's composting regulations. This would create a less onerous permitting system for composting and will greatly expand opportunities for small-scale operations, farmers, and entrepreneurs, and any necessary tech amendments. Any discussion? I'll take the vote. Chair votes aye. Of the members present, are there any reservations or votes in opposition? Seeing none, the measure passes. Thank you, members. Then moving to SB 132 relating to water pollution. Members, in 2018, Hawaii became the world leader in safe sunscreens with the enactment of Act 104, which banned the dangerous chemicals oxybenzone and octinoxate starting January 1st of this year. SB 132, it takes the next step. So the chair's recommendation is to pass SB 132 with amendments. Given the latest research and the testimony from the Hawaii Reef and Ocean Coalition, will remove the mention of the chemicals octisalate and homisalate. The January 1st, 2023 ban in SB 132 would instead include the sunscreen chemicals avobenzone and octocrylene. So we'll delete the definitions of homosalate and octisalate from the bill and add the definition of avobenzone in HB 102 HD1, plus any tech amendments. Members, any discussion? Yes.
Reservations.
Okay. All right. The chair votes aye. Senator Nishihara has reservations. Any other reservations or opposition? Seeing none, the measure passes. Thank you, members. Okay, we are at 1026. Senate Bill 1026 relating to the Animal Industry Special Fund. Okay, members, my recommendation will be to pass SB 1026 with tech amendments. Any discussion? Seeing none, chair votes aye. Are there any no votes or reservations from the members? Seeing none, the measure passes. Thank you, members. And moving on to 1027 relating to hemp. The chair's recommendation would be pass SB 1027 with tech amendments. Any discussion? Any no votes or opposition? Seeing none, the measure passes. And then moving on to Senate Bill 1297 relating to the issuance of the SPURBs to assist Maui Grown Coffee, Inc. Chair's recommendation would be to pass SB 1297 as is. Any discussion? All right, any opposition votes or reservations? Seeing none, the measure passes. Moving on to SB 1344 relating to food sustainability.
I'm sorry, Chair. I have
Yes.
reservations.
On 13.
On 1297?
Oh, okay.
That
So
where we-
I will note on Senate Bill 1297 on the spur reservations from Senator Ocasio.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. And then with 1344, my recommendation will be to pass with amendments. Per the Office of Planning's testimony, will adopt their suggested amendments, which will integrate the Wild Seafood Sustainability Plan update into the State Agricultural Functional Plan. Will include the Office of Planning as the appropriate department agency that would work with Department of Ag, and will also give the governor an additional year for the submittal of the functional plan to the legislature. So it will be 2023 instead of 2022. As was pointed out by Office of Planning, the last time it was updated, the functional plan was 1991. Any discussion?
Sure. This is Carl. Yes, so I'm just going to vote with reservations. We already eat wild seafood. Well, many of us eat wild seafood already, and the history of humankind and overfishing it's almost always everything is overfished. So that's why I have reservations. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Any other votes in opposition or reservations? Seeing none, the measure.
Sorry, I'll vote with reservations, please.
Okay, for Ocasio and Rhodes, reservations. Nishihara?
Reservation.
Reservations, thank you. Okay, and then moving on to the final measure of the 1 o'clock agenda, SB 1405, relating to the plant quarantine branch. Chair's recommendation will be to pass SB 1405 with tech amendments. Any discussion? Seeing none, chair votes aye. Are there any no votes or votes in votes with reservations amongst the members? Seeing none, the measure passes. And I'm going to gavel out. We do have a 145. Let's see. Yes, we have the 145 AEN coming up. But I'll go ahead and gavel out and then we'll come back in. Thank you. Makako. This is the 145 hearing of the Agriculture and Environment Committee. It is Wednesday, February 17th. And let's see, we have one item on the agenda, Senate Bill 692, relating to food security, initiates reporting requirements and safeguards to prevent anti-competitive practices in the meat processing industry. Okay, first up is Phyllis Geiser from the Hawaii Department of Ag.
Aloha Chair and members of the committee. The department stands on its written testimony offering comments.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. Next is Herbert Tim Richards from the Hawaii County Council.
Aloha, good afternoon, Chair Gabbard, Vice Chair Nishihara, and committee members. My name is Tim Richards. I'm a generational cattle rancher, livestock veterinarian in Hawaii for over 35 years, and a sitting county council member chairing agriculture, water, energy, and environmental management. I strongly support Senate Bill 692. Hawaii has an initiative for food self-reliance and food security. COVID-19 has highlighted this concern. For food security to occur, and in this case, cattle or beef, to be successful, it must be profitable. This profitability will happen when a free market exists and producers, in this case, ranchers, get closer to the retail dollar. Processing access is key for ranchers to have their animals custom processed and market that beef themselves. Any threat of a monopolistic climate threatens this potential for our cattle industry. Good public policy will support and protect this expanding cattle industry. SB 692 puts those guardrails in place that supports our industries. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I'll remain available for questions.
Councilman. Next is Lauren Zerbel from the Hawaii Food Industry Association.
Hi, Senator. They're not present.
Thank you. Bobby Farias from Hawaii Meats, LLC.
Hello, good afternoon. Chair, thank you, and committee members for the opportunity. My name is Bobby Farias, a third-generation rancher from Kauai, and part owner of the facility here in Kailaloa in Oahu. I'd like to stand on my testimony with strong opposition to this bill. I've been involved in this facility here in Oahu for 6 years, and over the islands, trying to find ways to better the cattle industry here for the small rancher. Like I said, I'm a small rancher from Kauai, and over the last 6 years, found out what was part of the things that the small rancher needed was the ability to aggregate their cattle over through a house brand so that they weren't encumbered with the costs and the problems with marketing. The DOE was a good example that ranchers could raise cattle and focus on ranching while the slaughter facility focused on marketing and getting those cattle to market. The other thing is, the regulation of the growth of this industry is not going to play good into the food security. The larger the system gets, the better. Capitalizing it was also very important, which was very hard to do over the 6 years while I was involved in this facility. Now that we have capitalization, the ability to grow that to the size that we can get the price points where we need it to be competitive and get the smaller ranchers access to facilities to get their products into market. We're not opposed by any means by people retaining ownership to their cattle, but what's needed on the bigger picture for the larger group of ranchers, the small ranchers, is the ability to aggregate and have that be the problem of the house brand to market their products so that they can find profitability on the ranch on their side.
Mahalo, Bobby. I'm sorry, I got to cut you off. We have a hard deadline at 2:30. Mahalo. And you can stick around for questions if we have time.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Bobby. Next is Nicole Galassi from the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council.
Aloha, Chair Gabbard, Vice Chair Nishihara, and members of the committee. Nicole Galassi testifying on behalf of the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council. We offer comments on this measure. The Hawaii Cattlemen's Council appreciates that this bill is being heard, as it raises several critical issues for our industry, which we believe involves all stakeholders. This includes the state as a lessor of the 2 largest packing plants in Hawaii. HCC supports the intent of SB 692 to provide guardrails to prevent possible anti-competitive practices in Hawaii's meat processing industry, as well as to ensure that all cattle producers have access to a processing facility and the ability to retain ownership of beef through the plant if they choose to do so. We believe that a state lease processing facility should provide a level of service to the state as a whole and not give any advantage or preference to any particular person or locality. While HCC strongly supports addressing these issues, we find that certain provisions of the bill as currently drafted have raised concerns from some of our members. In an effort to truly represent the breadth and feedback from our membership, we have opted to offer this testimony with comments rather than support, since support with reservations is not an option when filing electronically. We do acknowledge that Parker Ranch has offered amendments to the bill, and we appreciate that. As stated in our testimony, there may be some use for legislation at some point, albeit in an amended version. Most importantly, though, we're encouraged to learn that since the hearing on the companion bill HB 1206, the framework for open constructive dialogue has been initiated between the two largest stakeholders. Hawaii's beef industry faces complicated hurdles, and we need to move forward as a united industry. So many of our ranchers have the historical knowledge, aptitude, and pragmatism to help us on that route. HCC encourages all efforts to remedy this concerning issue outside of the legislature, leaving that as a last option. Thank you.
Mahalo, Nicole. Next is Chad Buck from the Hawaii Food Service Alliance, LLC.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Chad Buck. I'm the owner of Hawaii Food Service Alliance. HFA is locally owned and operated with food distribution facilities on Maui, Kauai, Oahu, and the Big Island. We employ several hundred staff members and serve every grocery retailer, club, C-store chain on every island every day. And we are the largest distributor of local beef across the state of Hawaii. And we are in full support of Senate Bill 692. For most of 2020, I worked alongside the new owner of both the Kalailoa and the Pauilo plants. I drew up the first drafts for expanding the size and capabilities of both these plants. That said, I made the decision to part ways with the new owner and his team in December of last year. And having a front row seat to this development, I should state that this issue is not just an issue between a few parties in the local beef industry. This bill will decide whether the future of local beef for local people will be guided by the state of Hawaii, as in of the people, by the people, and for the people, or by the will and whim of a single individual from out of state. I strongly believe that the guidelines and guardrails need to be set by the state as to what is best for all stakeholders, from the rancher to the Hawaii consumer. Simply put, controlling slaughter and processing means you also control the ranches whose families have raised cattle in Hawaii for generations. And you control the overall supply and pricing of local beef for local people. And this has never been more important than during the COVID outbreak. This level of control should have guidelines and rules determined by the state of Hawaii rather than the will or whim of an individual. I know of no case in history where a monopoly has been good for markets or consumers. If an individual had a monopoly of Hawaii's electric generation, shipping, agricultural lands, or grocery options, our leaders at the legislature would move quickly to step in to ensure proper guidelines to protect our people.
Sorry, I have to cut you off, Chad. Mahalo for your testimony.
Mahalo.
Next is Scott Enright from Hawaii Meats, LLC.
Vice Chair Nishihara, committee members, Scott Enright for Hawaii Sustainable Beef. Chair, I'd like to stand on my written testimony in opposition to SB 692, but if I could offer a few comments. One, 5 years ago when I was with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, I went county by county, statewide with the Cattlemen's Council to ask both ranchers and processors what was needed for the industry to flourish in the 21st century. And the consensus opinion was we needed to, modernize the back end of the business, the slaughterhouse and the value added. But what we never answered, the question that didn't get answered was who was going to capitalize this? And this is the same problem that we have in a number of ag commodity groups in Hawaii, is capitalization. And obviously, because this has gone on for decades, there was nobody that was stepping forward to capitalize that. Well, now we've got someone that stepped forward. and they're willing to capitalize the back end of this business. I find it truly unfortunate that we find ourselves in conflict before there were ever good faith sit-down negotiations. This hasn't happened, as Nicole from Cattlemen's Council mentioned just earlier in her testimony. This is just starting to happen. So the legislation precedes any kind of negotiations that I believe will work their way through and be in the best interest. And you know, monopoly, the word monopoly has been used a number of times and will be used again, I would imagine, in further testimony. Historically, monopoly disenfranchises the smallest players in a commodity group. In this case, if you look at the testimony and you go forward from that, the small ranchers are backing this move on the slaughterhouses because the attempt is going to be to open up capacity for the small
Sorry,
ranchers.
Scott. Got to cut you off, Scott.
Okay.
Sorry. Aloha.
Thank you, Chair. Aloha.
Next is Zanga Shoot from Z-Bar Ranch.
Hello, Chair. Thank you, members. My name is Zanga Shuti. I'm a small rancher on the Big Island. I have 700 head of cattle that I run on numerous acres of land. I strongly oppose SB 692. By expanding capacity at the Powilo plant, ranchers such as myself will be able to sell and process our animals on the Big Island versus shipping our cattle to Oahu, which a lot of our ranchers are doing today. The Powilo plant is limited to the amount of capacity to fulfill our needs here on the Big Island. It's been difficult to reserve kill slots for decades, 3 to 8 months out. When I heard about Bobby Farias was opening up a slaughterhouse on Oahu, I was all in. It was an opportunity for all ranchers, big or small, not only here on the Big Island, but for ranchers throughout the state of Hawaii to have a facility that could service our needs for our cows and bulls, as well as our grass-fed cattle. Now we have an opportunity to expand the Powilo plant to make more kill slots available and to have more capacity to service the needs of our ranch families, thanks to Frank Vandersloot. I believe that Frank Vandersloot's presence here in Hawaii helps us ranchers, small ranchers, not hurt us. I believe there is room for every rancher, big or small, to be able to have their voices heard and a place to process their cattle. Please help the small ranchers. I strongly oppose this bill, SB 692. Thank you.
Mahalo, Zanga. Next up is Micah Munakata from Ulupono Initiative.
Good afternoon, Chair Gabbard, Vice Chair Nishihara, and members of the committee. Micah Munikata here on behalf of the Ulupono Initiative. We'd like to stand on our testimony in support of this measure, Chair, and just offer a few additional comments. Ulupono has worked for many years to increase local grass-fed beef production in the state. One of the ways in which we've done that is by partnering with Parker Ranch to form Paniolo Cattle Company, which produces grass-fed beef exclusively for local consumption. Beyond Paniolo Cattle Company, Ulupono supports the entire livestock industry and its ability to process within the state, and therefore welcomes new investment and expansion of processing capacity within the state. However, with more than 70% of meatpacking capacity in the state now owned or controlled ultimately by a single person or entity, there is considerable risk to competition and fair market access. With both Hawaii beef producers on Hawaii Island and Oahu Kalailoa slaughterhouse facilities under common ownership, the market has been consolidated to a level that causes real concerns. This situation results in a high-risk impact to the local livestock industry that should require mitigating factors or controls. Since both meatpacking plants are ultimately state assets, we believe the state has an obligation to ensure non-discriminatory access for all producers, including those that wish to maintain their own brands and programs with retailers. This bill provides the necessary mitigation to ensure fair market access and transparency. Thank you very much, Chair.
Mahalo, Micah. Next up is Paul Alston from Denton's U.S.
And members of the committee. I represent Frank Vandersloot and his companies. I also am in the unique position of owning a farm on the Big Island where I raise a small number of cattle. And I've experienced firsthand the kind of delays and problems that others have testified to earlier. But what I want to do is emphasize 3 points that are covered in my written testimony. First, this this bill is based on unfounded fears and false claims. Mr. Vandersloot has neither said nor done anything to raise legitimate concerns that he's about to engage in some sort of predatory behavior. In fact, from the beginning, he has repeatedly reached out to the industry statewide in an effort to get a dialogue going to see what is best, not for him, but for the ranchers statewide. Second, the bill is based on misrepresentations about the ownership of the plants. Mr. Vandersloot, as the lessee, owns the plants until the lease is done. These are not state assets that can be appropriated and used as the state wishes, because he has constitutional rights to do his business in the broad manner permitted under the existing leases and not be subject to new regulation. Third, there are existing laws which cover all manner of unfair competition. Mr. Vandersloot is covered by them. There is no purpose to adopting new rules and another layer of bureaucracy and oversight when the existing laws will do it. Next, I would say that there is simply no need to add bureaucracy here that will give competitive advantage to Parker Ranch and Kuahivi Ranch, the owners of large brands, to the detriment of small ranchers statewide. Thank you, Chairman.
Mahalo, Paul. Next is Frank Vandersloot.
Good afternoon, Chair Gabbard and members of the committee. Aloha. My name is Frank Vandersloot. I'm a farm kid from Idaho. I am founder of a company called Melaleuca, and we've been in business here in Hawaii. We have a distribution center for here in Honolulu for 35 years. I've been blessed in my life more than I could ever deserve. And I've looked for ways, I'm talking about financial blessings from my business. I can't believe that I find myself in this situation, and I've looked for ways to pay back. And I've found a few ways to do that. This is one of the ways that I want to pay back. I'm endeavoring to do a good thing here. Some time ago, many years ago, I was able to be approached by the dairymen in my community, and they asked me to buy the local cheese plant because it was going out of business. Kraft was going to close it. There'd be no place to 100 some odd families to send their milk. So we bought it, we expanded it. We provided financing for it needed bigger volumes to make it survive. We expanded the ranches and allowed that plant to flourish. It's still there today. I lost money on it, but it's one of my proudest moments. And that industry, we saved over 1,000 jobs. This industry, there's so much opportunity here for the state of Hawaii. If we can build these plants and bring more capacity in, that's what I'm endeavoring to do. It's true. There's not a lot of competition. No one's wanted to invest. There haven't been any investors for 20 years. I'm going to lose money in this deal, but I'm trying to do a good thing. I realize I have a responsibility here. Had the state of Idaho put these kind of regulations on that cheese plant, it was the only cheese plant. They could have called it a monopoly. There was no place else. But we didn't take advantage of that. Everybody came together. Everybody should be supporting what's good for the entire industry. I'm asking for.
Frank. Sorry,
Yes, sir.
Frank, I got to cut you off. Hard deadline. Thank you very much for your testimony. We have Dutch Kuiper.
Good afternoon. Parker Ranch is Hawaii's oldest business, founded in 1847. I'm CEO and author of SB 692. We hope you recognize the broad base of support as evidenced by those that filed support for SB 692, including HGEA. I want to bring your attention to proposed amendments included in my written testimony to address questions that surfaced at the hearing on the House side. The specific question of constitutionality and property rights is irrelevant in my view. There's no taking of property per se. While I have great respect for the Attorney General, the AG's legal analysis of constitutionality fails to recognize that today 40 to 50% of the plant capacity is already processing independent brands for those producers and has for many years, more than a decade in a couple of cases. The law that matters is antitrust law. Precedence was set 12 years ago when Michelle Galimba launched the Kuahivi brand and 7 years ago when we launched the Paniolo Cattle Company brand. Independent programs have succeeded and represent direct competition to the packer, which explains why the other side's adversarial view of the bill. We're just trying to preserve our market position with safeguards, as well as for those for other producers in the future that want to enter the market as independent brands, not destroy the prospects for the packer. There is not taking of property per se, because the role of independent brands was in place for many years when the billionaire amassed his 70% monopoly position in the past year. Antitrust laws and compliance with the regulations of the Packers and Stockyards Act are applicable and more relevant. As capacity is added, new capacity should be available to new independent brands as well as the house brand. Any attempt to thwart or restrict independent programs would be violations of the Packers and Stockyard Act. Parker Ranch is the Packers' largest customer, supplier, and competitor, even though we only have about 15 to 20% of the local grass-fed market. But they only treat us like a competitor. What does that tell you? The plant manager for the last 15 years, who resigned last week, supports this bill. What does that tell you? They won't
Dutch, I'm
publish their
sorry.
business plan. What does
Got to
that
cut
tell
you off, Dutch.
Thank you.
And members and the public, I'm sorry that we are hard up against a 2:30 deadline. So I'm going to have to cut this off now because, and just a couple of comments as of concerns that I've had and others have had. As of 5 p.m. yesterday, the Attorney General told us that this bill, quote, may be challenged as a taking of property requiring just compensation or as an impairment of contract in derogation of the constitutions of the United States and the state of Hawaii, unquote. And the AG also said that there are concerns about preemption by the Livestock Mandatory Reporting Act. So the chair believes that the stakeholders need to sit down. I know, as was said in the testimony, it sounds like it's begun, but you guys need to sit down and talk story and try to work it out instead of government stepping in. And so if no can, at least you tried. And then consider going into mediation, arbitration, or going to the federal courts. So having said that, I'm going to be deferring SB 692 indefinitely. So I will adjourn the meeting. Mahalo for participating. Aloha.